we have 2 more units till the end of the school year. The first one is the nervous system. We're going to first talk about how the nervous system is put together. The building block of the nervous system are neurons, nerve cells. And that's what you see in this drawing here. The nerve impulse is drawn in by a structure called the dendrite. I don't know how well you can see that, but that's where the dendrite word is. So that's right here. Then you have the cell body. This is the main part of the neuron with the nucleus in the middle, right there. It didn't circle that very well. And then the axon begins with A. It carries the nerve impulse away. That's this big long thing right here, this blue thing. And then the axon endings branch off and make contact with several other neurons. So what you see here is the nerve impulse travels from here. The dendrite draws the nerve impulse in, and then the axon carries the nerve impulse away to the next neurons. There are 3 types of neurons. The sensory neurons are attached to our sense organs, and they bring information to the brain and the spinal cord. Interneurons are in the spinal cord. They do the processing of the message, and then the motor neurons send a message back to the muscles. This is called the reflex arc. We have an example of an incident that requires reflex action. Right here you have somebody stubbing their toe on a table. The sensory neuron carries that information to the spinal cord, to the interneuron. Usually reflexes require quick action, so it's a shorter pathway to get to the spinal cord than to go all the way to the brain. So the spinal cord deals with reflexes. Sensory neuron carries that information, the stubbed toe, the pain, to the interneuron. The interneuron sends the message back down through the motor neuron that contracts the muscles, in this case the hamstring, that'll draw that toe away from the table. So the pathway goes up the sensory neuron to the spinal cord. The interneuron takes care of the message, sends a message down through the motor neuron to get the toe to move. Things you need to know about neurons. Neurons help the body gather information. A bundle of axons, those things that carry messages away from the neuron, a bundle of axons is called a nerve. The sciatic nerve, if you've heard of people having sciatica, it's leg pain, upper leg pain. It's one long axon that takes a message from the lower spinal cord to the lower leg. It's one long axon that runs the length of our leg. A nerve impulse, that's what I've been calling it, is also called an action potential. Know that those are synonyms. It's an electrical impulse. The threshold is the minimum amount of stimulus required to cause an action potential. So, what amount of pain do you feel when you put your hand on a hot stove to get a response? That happens real quick. But if you close a book on your hand, that may or may not hurt. Action potential, the nerve impulses, can move at different speeds depending on the situation of the axon. If the axon is insulated, it's covered by these little bluish, whitish marshmallowy things called myelin. This is myelin right here. They look like little marshmallows. In between the myelin are these areas called nodes. Myelin increases the speed of the action potential. So if you have myelin on the axons, you're going to feel sharp pain. No myelin, you're going to feel dull pain. The signal travels more quickly when it jumps from node to node. So basically the signal skips these myelinated areas. So the signal travels more quickly in sort of an emergency situation. what's going on in between neurons? The synapse is a gap. It's a space between neurons. And what you see happening is these neurotransmitters, there are 25 of them, help that message get from one neuron to the other. When an action potential reaches the axon ending, like you see right here, so the action potential travels down the axon and to an axon ending, it causes neurotransmitters to be released into that gap, the synapse. The neurotransmitters carry the message to the next neuron, and then the action potential moves through that neuron, and so on and so forth. It's very important to know that if there is no neurotransmitter, then the signal cannot cross the synapse. That signal will be interrupted. Now we're going to talk about how the nervous system is organized. The central nervous system is quite simply the brain and spinal cord. It's made up of interneurons. It coordinates the body's activities. It relays messages, it processes information, and it analyzes responses. So here are some different examples of what can happen. These are the different pathways. We already talked about the reflex arc. A sensory neuron brings information in, the interneuron in the spinal cord processes that information and sends a message back out to the motor neuron. Then you have a one-way path. That's a circular path. A one-way path has the sensory neurons sending message through the spinal cord to the brain. Then the brain directs the motor neurons to respond, and that completes a circular pathway, or it stores and processes the information and holds it there. So it can be a one-way street. This can be a circular pathway. Let's take a look at the brain. The biggest part of the brain is called the cerebrum. It's this part right here, the largest part of the brain. Back behind is the cerebellum. Cerebellum is here. The cerebellum controls movements, muscle coordination. Cerebrum is in charge of higher thought processes. So cerebrum, higher thought processes, emotions, senses. Cerebellum coordinates movement. We have the medulla oblongata right here, breathing and heart rate. The pons as well, and the hypothalamus. As I said, the medulla oblongata controls heart rate and blood pressure. You can remember that because medulla oblongata is 2 words, heart rate is 2 words, and blood pressure is 2 words. The pons is the relay between the cerebrum and the cerebellum. It's kind of the midpoint. Those together are called the brain stem. So on the test, you'll need to know where those are. It's the area down below the brain. And again, the cerebrum is involved in memory and thought processes. That's this one right here. Memory and thought processes. And cerebellum is in charge of movements. The spinal cord goes from the brain to the lower back. It's protected by bones called vertebrae. Nerves extend out from the spinal cord to parts of the body. The spinal cord's job is to connect the body to the central nervous system and process reflexes. The peripheral nervous system is all the neurons that are not part of the brain and spinal cord. Again, a nerve is a bundle of axons, both sensory and motor, so you have information going in both directions. These are two-way streets leading to and from the brain. There are 2 parts of the peripheral nervous system, the somatic and the autonomic nervous systems. Somatic nervous system is what we control. It's voluntary. The pathway is this. You have sensory neurons going to the central nervous system, and back. The message goes back to motor neurons. Like I said, this is voluntary actions. So if I want to put on my coat, that's my somatic nervous system. It's a conscious action. Sometimes reflexes are processed by this, and remember this happens in the spinal cord. The autonomic nervous system, if you look at the word autonomic, kind of looks like automatic. And that's exactly what's happening here. The central nervous system controls the internal organs using the autonomic nervous system. This is involuntary. You have two parts to the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is in times of stress. The parasympathetic nervous system takes over in times of rest. Or I guess we could say peace. So sympathetic begins with S, stress begins with S, parasympathetic begins with P, and peace begins with P. That's how you can remember that. We're going to go through the different senses in class. We're going to go through those with the objectives, and you're going to make some diagrams with that. That's a little bit more on that. You can refer back to that. Interesting facts about taste and smell. Taste includes taste buds. They sense chemicals. It's closely connected to smell. Reduced sense of taste if the nose is clogged. That's how closely connected taste and smell are. The smell, you need to know that the neurons are called olfactory sense neurons. These also sense chemical stimuli. And interestingly enough, most of what we think is taste is actually smell. So if you hold your nose, you're not going to be able to taste things as well.